The letter sat on the kitchen counter, crisp and white against the scarred laminate, a termination notice dressed in corporate legalese. But the words that actually killed me weren't the official ones. They were scrawled in the margin of my own proposal, in red ink, by the only mentor I'd ever trusted. "Henry, this isn't science. It's eco-fantasy. Go home." I stood there, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the apartment, tasting copper in my mouth. I had spent 3 years engineering a strain of cyanobacteria that could inhale carbon dioxide and exhale oxygen at 50 times the rate of a rainforest canopy. I had the data. I had the Petri dishes glowing neon green in the dark, pulsing like a second heartbeat. They called it a liability. They called me a liability. I drove the 4 hours to my childhood home that night, not looking for comfort. I knew better than that, but looking for a witness. I needed someone to see the blueprints before I burned them. The house smelled of lemon polish and disappointment. My father sat in his recliner, the TV murmuring a game show. My mother folded laundry at the dining table, her movements sharp, efficient. My younger brother, Mark, leaned against the doorframe, scrolling on his phone, the picture of practical success in his logistics coordinator's polo. I spread the prints on the table. It works. The algae sequesters carbon, produces biofuel as a byproduct, and dies off if the temperature drops below freezing. No invasive risk. It's a reset button for the atmosphere. Dad didn't look up. "Henry, you're 32. You have a degree from a real school. Why are you playing with pond scum?" "It's not pond scum, Dad. It's bioengineered climate technology. The firm shut me down. I need to keep going. I needed you to know I'm not crazy." Mark snorted, a sharp, ugly sound. "Crazy? No. Embarrassing? Absolutely. You got fired for chasing a science fair project. Mom cries herself to sleep worrying about your health insurance, and you're here talking about magic algae." "Mark," Mom started, her voice tight. "No, let him speak," Dad said, finally turning his head. His eyes were flat. "We didn't raise you to be a joke, Henry. We raised you to be a provider, a professional. You're not a savior. You're a son who refuses to grow up. Go get a real job, sell insurance, manage a warehouse. Stop humiliating this family with your fantasies." The word hung in the air, heavier than the humidity in a greenhouse. Fantasies. I looked at the 3 people who shared my blood. I saw no curiosity. No "tell me more." Only the reflection of my own failure magnified by their fear. "Okay," I whispered. The fight drained out of me, replaced by a cold, hard kernel of something far more dangerous than hope: resolve. "Okay. I'll go." I didn't burn the blueprints. I put them in a waterproof case, threw them in the trunk of my dying Honda, and drove away from the only home I'd ever known, the taillights swallowing the driveway. The next 5 years didn't happen in a lab with funding. They happened in a leaking garage in a town where the rent was cheap and the winters were brutal. They happened in the space between paychecks from a night shift at a warehouse, irony not lost on me, where I stacked boxes by the light of grow lamps rigged to car batteries. I failed 943 times. I counted. Contamination, genetic drift, the algae turning into sludge, the algae dying in the dark, the algae eating through the plastic bioreactors. I slept in 2-hour shifts on a foam mat, my fingers stained permanent green, smelling of sulfur and wet earth. The ridicule followed me, internalized now: eco-fantasy, pond scum, embarrassment. But on attempt 944, the spectrometer spiked. The carbon dioxide levels in the sealed chamber plummeted. The oxygen readout climbed. The biofuel separator filled with clear amber liquid. I didn't cheer. I just stared at the numbers, my hands shaking so hard I dropped the stylus. I had done it. The carbon whisperer wasn't a nickname anymore. It was a mechanism. Scaling it took another 2 years. Convincing a skeptical venture capitalist took 3 presentations where I was laughed out of the room before the 4th one, where a woman named Elena simply looked at the data, looked at the dead, gray field behind her building where I'd run a pilot, and looked at the green explosion consuming it 3 weeks later. She wrote a check that had more zeros than my student loans. Global Carbon Solutions. That was the name on the building now. The trucks rolling out carried bioreactors the size of shipping containers. The satellites overhead tracked the green blooms spreading across dead zones, abandoned strip mines, salt flats, the suffocating outskirts of megacities. We weren't just capturing carbon, we were knitting soil back together. We were growing forests in decades where nature took centuries. I became the guy the UN called. The guy the documentaries filmed walking through a valley that had been gray dust 6 months prior, now dripping with humidity and bird song, the air sweet and thick. But the numbers, the awards, the keynotes, they were just noise. There was only one metric that mattered. I drove the rented SUV up the familiar cracked driveway. The house looked smaller. The paint was peeling. The lemon polish smell was gone, replaced by dust and disuse. I knocked. No answer. I tried the handle, unlocked, always unlocked. Inside, the silence was thick. Dad was in the recliner, thinner now, the skin paper-thin over his knuckles. An oxygen cannula rested on his cheeks, hissing softly. Mom sat beside him, her hair entirely white, her hands folded in her lap. Mark wasn't there. Henry, Dad's voice was a rasp, barely audible over the oxygen concentrator. Is that the insurance man? I walked over, the heavy soles of my boots silent on the carpet. I didn't wear a suit. I wore the field jacket, stained at the cuffs with the green dust of life. No, Dad. It's me. He blinked, the cataracts clouding the blue. Henry, you're late. Dinner was hours ago. I know, I got held up. Changing the world takes time. He frowned, a flicker of the old fire. Don't be dramatic. Your mother made pot roast. It's dried out by now. I don't need dinner, Dad. I need you to look out the window. Mom stood up slowly, her joints popping. Henry, please. Your father needs rest. Why don't you go see Mark? He's at the depot. He's a shift supervisor now, very respectable. Mom, I said gently, just look. I walked to the front picture window, the one I used to stare out of, dreaming of escape. I pulled the heavy drapes aside. The view had always been the neighbor's vinyl siding, the cracked asphalt of the cul-de-sac, the brown, patchy grass struggling in the shade of the maples. It wasn't there anymore. Where the neighbor's house stood, a vertical forest climbed the walls, a living tapestry of ferns and flowering vines fed by a silent, humming bioreactor unit disguised as a downspout. The cul-de-sac was a meadow. Wildflowers, purple coneflower, black-eyed Susan, milkweed, exploded in chaotic, glorious color, buzzing with bees so loud it sounded like a generator. The patchy grass, gone, replaced by a thick, spongy moss that drank the air and exhaled purity. The maples weren't struggling. They were giants, their leaves the size of dinner plates, drinking the enriched atmosphere. The air itself looked different, cleaner, sharper. You could see the light moving through it differently. Mom gasped. A small, broken sound. She pressed a hand to her mouth. Oh my God, Henry, what is this? It's the algae, Mom. The pond scum. We aerosolized a dormant strain, seeded the clouds over the county last week. It settles, it wakes up, it eats the carbon, it builds the soil. It heals the lungs. She turned to me, tears tracking through the lines on her face. The air, Henry, your father, his copped. The doctor said, look at his monitor, I said quietly. She spun back to the recliner, the pulse oximeter on Dad's finger. The number had always hovered in the low 80s, a constant, terrifying reminder of the fragility of the man who had crushed my dreams. It read 98. Dad took a breath, a deep, rattling, full breath. His shoulders dropped, the tension of a decade exhaling in a single second. He opened his eyes, really looked at me, the cataracts seeming to clear for just a moment. The air, he whispered, it doesn't hurt to breathe. No, Dad, I said, kneeling beside the chair, taking his cold hand in my warm, green-stained one. It doesn't hurt anymore. He stared at the meadow where the driveway used to be, the butterflies dancing over the coneflowers. The hummingbird, a hummingbird, in October, darting into the vines on the neighbor's wall. Eco-fantasy, he breathed, the words barely a whisper, devoid of all mockery. You You built a world where I can breathe. I built a world where we can breathe, Dad, I corrected softly. All of us. He closed his eyes, not in sleep, but in a peace I had never seen on his face. Proud, he murmured, so proud of my boy. The carbon whisperer. The word hung in the perfected air, no longer an insult, a title, a legacy. I stayed until the stars came out, brighter than I'd ever seen them, unfiltered by smog. I slept in my old room, the twin bed too short, the mattress lumpy. But the window was open, and for the first time in my life, the air coming in didn't smell of exhaust or regret. It smelled like the future. And it smelled like forgiveness. Success isn't the applause. It isn't the zeros in the bank account. It's the moment the person who doubted you takes a breath they couldn't take yesterday, looks you in the eye, and finally, truly sees you. That's the only metric that ever mattered.